Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. I've just gotten back from seeing an amazing metal show by Ghost, and Appsec has nothing at all to do with it. But this is an ASW intro, so what musical metaphor can we craft? Maybe security is just banging two sticks together and playing too fast, expecting everyone else to catch up, or playing too slow and dragging everyone else down with us. Or maybe, just maybe, finding a rhythm that gets everyone in sync. Which means this week we talk with John Kinsella about basic Appsec skills, finding areas of interest, and deciding on specializations. Count to 4 and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly.
Think your terminal emulation is secure? Think again. Passwords and firewalls alone won't protect you. Cyber threats are evolving, and so should your security. Rocket Secure Host Access gives you phishing-resistant, password-free protection with leading-edge encryption. Your mission-critical systems deserve more than good enough. Secure your green screen access and stay ahead of the threat. Rocket Secure Host Access. The future of TE is now. Learn more at securityweekly.com/rocketsoftware. This is episode 339, recorded on July 14th, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shima. I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Good morning. I'm trying to think of a good drummer joke, but nothing right now.
My favorite one of all time is 3 musicians and a drummer walk into a bar. Pause. Long pause while it sinks in. But, John, we got to talk about some basic AppSec skills before our producers come in and cut us down, which, yes, by the way, they're drummers, and we do love our producers, so that all you listeners know. But rather than try to do 4 to the floor or some other basic beats, we covered a Cybersecurity Framework.io page. This is from the OpenSSF, Open Source Security Foundation, and the Linux Foundation got together. And they created a list of 14 that they called cybersecurity-related roles. And these are things like web developers, software developers, 2 different types of architects, DevOps. There's an AI engineer in there, which I'm sure we'll get to in a second. Mm-hmm. But part of the idea is that if I just say, what's the basic
manager? Sorry, go ahead.
Hold on to your excitement. We'll get there, John. I know. But one of the things I wanted to point out, if I just say, what's a basic AppSec skill that everyone should know, in a way that I feel like that's actually even a poorly formed question. Yeah. Because on the one hand, AppSec is so encompassing, we should be more specific to specializations or areas of focus. And also, despite this being an Application Security Weekly, I would love it if just AppSec itself went away and turned into development, writing code. So that's sort of how I wanted to set this up. And I can see the John Kinsella gears already turning in your head. And I'm going to pick on maybe a couple of start with this Cybersecurity Framework.io and pick on a couple of the basic skills they call out. And just to see, do we agree, disagree, or does this feel like a skill that should be basic or not? Or what? Try to unpack it there. So without further ado, if I click on, for example, like a web developer, one of the basic skills is implement basic input validation and injection prevention techniques to safeguard against, you can probably complete this sentence, XSS and SQL injection. To me, the spirit of that sounds fine, but I'm going to be pedantic in here and say neither of those are input validation problems. They're output encoding, or they're the concept of separating data from commands using frameworks, using prepared statements. And SQL injection could be command injection. We just covered last week in JavaScript, in an article about MCPs, of course. We're going to have to mention MCPs and LLMs, but that was using string concatenation rather than fundamental functions that already exist for handling argument strings. So I don't know. Am I getting too specific in there? Does that feel like a constructive conversation if we were trying to talk to someone about, hey, you want to get into AppSec, do I need to be pedantic about input validation and frameworks, or what's the skill that you would try to tease out of this?
I was going to say, it feels like that sentence as you read it, it sounds like something I've seen in a pen test report before, but I get your pedanticness. I think, so when I would start teaching or sort of bringing someone into this space, I want them to just understand what the things are first, period, right? Hey, input validation, output encoding, just understand those two things and like what they mean and how you, and I want to, let's back up here in a second, but understand what those two things literally are by themselves first. And then become, as people get more understanding, then focus down a little more about the pedanticness of like our actual details of when or what to use these things. But let's go further back, I think, to your one of your original points, even though we're still top of the hour, is do you just become a security engineer?
Yes.
Right? One of the common questions, which I think most of us sort of get frequently, is like, which certifications do I get first? I'm like, oh, I hate that question. It's like, that's cool, I get it. You're focused on the job where you want to go, but like, okay, you want to become a security person. What are you going to secure? Got a secure web application? Okay, well, why don't you go write a web application or figure out how those things work? You want to get into AI? That's the whole cool thing. Okay, well, maybe you should go play with like an LLM or at least a chatbot or something and understand what's going on there. I think it's really hard to secure something when you have no idea what that thing is. So I think that's really sort of the fundamental thing around any of these. I don't know, I didn't see them call that out in here.
Yeah, and I think what do you want to secure is I think that's such a better phrase for trying to set up the skills. And they sort of call that out in the sense of the job families of, they do have a web developer, they have a platform engineer, and they kind of call out I might describe the platform engineer as the guardrails implementer is maybe what they're getting at here. And the DevOps engineer is maybe more of it feels like a security focused because it's talking about a lot of IAM and RBAC. But it's not explicit in the title. And I don't know if that's a bad thing, but it speaks to your point about, do you specialize in LLMs, in cloud, in Kubernetes, in network, in IAM, what have you? And that's where it feels, honestly, it can be daunting because you can get a certificate in a lot of different ones of those as well, which the certificate might be educational, but how do you know it's also marketable? There's a subtext there. But there are things that might be cross-cutting, like encryption. Let's talk about that for a second. One of the basic skills does talk about basic encryption concepts between, the difference between symmetric, asymmetric encryption. That seems pretty reasonable. And the importance of protecting data in transit and in rest. Again, I maybe rephrase that in the sense of, what are the different attack scenarios, or what are the different things you need to be worried about when you are encrypting data at rest and getting access to it versus data in transit? And there I'm getting into like, how much do you care about a TLS handshake? Because I don't know, I think you do a lot of hiring. I know when I do hiring interviews on either end of the interview, a long time ago, they used to start off with, what's the TCP three-way handshake? And you start to unfold. Not that you know the specifics of the protocols and specific flags, but things like checksums, replay attacks, some theories. Do you get into TLS handshakes, or how do you tease out if someone knows the basics of symmetric or asymmetric encryption?
I'm framing my answer and thinking back because the type of people I hire now, I don't deal with that, right? So I'm hiring software developers nowadays. Actually, well, usually I'm hiring managers, but our senior devs. By the time, so in a larger company, by the time they've got to me, they've gone through pointy clicky types of things at some point. We usually have a pretty good sense of that. Although I know I did interview with one of our security teams, and they were poking at me on some like sort of, I don't want to say fundamentals, but lower level security concepts. In my previous worlds as a pure security play, I usually have the type of questions I like to ask is not so much that, but I'll go looking personally for in the modern world, or like sort of trying to revamp my brain into behavioral interviewing, which I sort of don't. But the type of question I like to ask is something that like shows me that someone has experience with that thing before. So one of my old favorites back in the Unix admin days, back in the 2000s, was where's the serial number on a Sun Enterprise 4500? It's not on the back of the box. It's actually on the front. And that very quickly would tell me, just as an example, like,
yeah,
hey,
I'd fail that one off the bat. Yeah.
But if someone has on their resume that, hey, I've worked with Sun Enterprise gear, and I was in a place where I was racking and stacking 10 or 15 of those things a month, and troubleshooting and working with them, I'd know pretty quickly if they knew what was going on or not. And I guess sort of the equivalent of that would be, I would probably try to frame a question around OpenSSL. So, hey, if you're building an application, or if you're looking for a security person, if you are working with an application team and they're asking you for how do you secure this application, what do you do from a secure connection point of view? So I try to probably keep it open and just sort of like let them go see where they go. But I would be looking to see if they think about TLS or what version of TLS and how that's actually implemented and what are your default ciphers and things like that, allowed ciphers. So that's probably the way I'd approach that.
That's interesting, because I had a conversation with a coworker a while back about TLS, and I was very much of the point of perspective of, I love TLS 1.3. It reduces so many of those decisions that you were saying in terms of what cipher, what algorithm. It does forward secrecy. It has all these wonderful properties that you just don't have to worry about it. It'd be the same thing if you use React for cross-site scripting. And they were making a point that, well, if they're just saying, I'll use TLS 1.3, they maybe can skip over the fundamentals of why that's important. And that doesn't seem like a loss to me. But it was an interesting perspective to say, well, I'm just going to use TLS 1.3 because I care about other things on my stack. And so I can see an argument for and against that not being a necessary basic. But I think I would still fall on the idea of know some properties so you can say, this is what happens with spoofing or replay, or especially hashing. If you're hashing a small, trying to do something like hashing to protect phone numbers, you just got a small key space. No hashing you're going to do is really going to help you unless it's keyed and you have some secret that you're adding into that you're also keeping secret, as it says. When you're talking about, look on where's the serial number for the Sunbox, maybe a modern aspect of that would be these days, how have you worked with authentication and authorization? And that, I think, points out to, if I just say OAuth, do I get corrected onto, well, are you talking about OIDC or SAML? Getting into, it's not authorization or authentication, which is fine to be called on if they can then explain why. And then if you say, okay, tell me about the last time you used a JOT. And if they go on, we used it, but we ran into this null cipher, or we weren't checking the signatures, some of these common implementation mistakes, that would be music to my ears in the sense of, you are demonstrating familiarity and you're starting to have, at least demonstrating the capacity for threat modeling as well. And I think that capacity for threat modeling is related to what you were describing as that behavioral interviewing, just figuring out how does this person think. And that's not necessarily a specific technical checklist that you might find on, OWASP Top 10.
I want to back up 1 second real quick, and for our listeners, if anyone's out there is looking for a job, Mike's company is hiring, and you get a chance to work with people who talk about TLS 1.3. Sorry, what I think. I'm sort of looking back through this the framework while we talk here, and one of the things I think it's missing there is, what job level are you working for? I mean, I know we're thinking about this segment purely from a, you're getting into the workforce or you want to get into InfoSec, but the next thing that I would think about is leveling that person. So am I looking to hire a junior, mid, or senior principal eng in this space? And then once again, the questions I'm going to ask are different, both from two things. One from, let's get my hands right, one from depth going down, and then the second from breadth. If you think about this list of things, this is a pretty crazy wide list, and I'm coming back to you here. But web developer to AI eng to DB eng to GRC manager to cybersecurity ops, those are vastly different, right? I know we're starting at the beginning, but my point here is you have to sort of pick which one of these things is your interest and then really sort of focus on that. So maybe initially, like when you're in college or early days, it's like, hey, just go and experiment and let your minds go wherever you want on this. But like go and experiment with the different security things. But at the same time, once you decide to go into a field, it's like, hey, this interests me. Let's go down this path. And then at that point, again, start with the OWASP top 10 type things, I think is where I would go. From the point of view of bringing it back to cross-site scripting and input validation and SQL injection and things like this. Then once you understand the application, okay, well, that's the application-ish type things. How do I secure this thing going over a wire? Well, we need SSL and OTLS. Okay, what do you want TLS? And then it's go deeper and deeper. The interesting thing about the questions, so here if you think about interviews, do I want to ask someone, and I'm just going to this path because we brought it up, if I'm interviewing somebody, do I care about your hands-on experience or your, you can tell I don't do this one because I'm having a hard time with the words, but the actual technical book knowledge? I don't really care as much about that, right? That's what Google's for in my mind. I've said that for years. So it's like, okay, have you done this is what I'm looking for in an interview. Have you experienced this? It could be in a class lab or something like that. I do give that lower, I'll say credit versus if you're working on an open source project and you're helping them secure it. But yeah, so it's where, what are those techs you're working with? How are you working with them? Maybe you spent the last 5 years, 10 years of your life at a company that has that attitude of, hey, we're air gapped, so we don't need to worry about encryption on the wire. Okay, well, how do you get that person up to speed? Do I want to hire them? But yeah, these things all sort of play into that together, at least in my head.
Yeah, and I think there's an aspect there too, is you're talking about, is this a junior person, more senior? One of the intermediate skills, I think this was under one of the developers, software developers, I believe, it was an intermediate skill to understand and apply threat modeling techniques throughout the SDLC. Mm-hmm. And that to me, I can understand to a degree that the depth of a threat model could be an intermediate skill that comes from experience, understanding how code is put together. But it also feels to me it's very much a basic skill, or should be a basic skill, in the sense that if you are writing software, you already have a sense of use cases, you already have a sense of error handling. Threat modeling is a little bit more of just obnoxious errors or malicious users or abuse cases that takes a little more, a little bit of different creative thinking, but I don't see it that far removed. And I think to your point about the can you just look it up on Google versus are you explaining, are you demonstrating experience? If someone comes to me and just starts rattling off Stride, I'll be like, okay, fine, but how have you used it? And specifically, tell me the last time you used repudiation in a threat model, because it's few and far between. But so that's where I care less about remembering a specific and would just more say, go look at that OWASP cheat sheet series, not the OWASP top 10. And is there something in that cheat sheet series that appeals to you, that looks like, oh, here's some fun technology, I'll play with it, I'll figure out why are these the recommendations for hardening it, play with it myself and build experience that way. So that's kind of the how I would hope to see, or maybe try to encourage someone getting into more so probably the engineering aspect of AppSec than the compliance or the GRC angles.
Yeah, I think that's that makes sense. I want to bring us back a little bit, because I think we were talking about the actual skills, and then we started talking about interviewing, going down a side path, whole separate podcast. So I'm the one thing I wish they had done on this list. Let's see. Hear me out on this one. Let's see if you agree. If you're going to get into, I'll say AppSec. I'm not sure if that's the right phrase, but I'll say AppSec. It might be InfoSec. I'm going to start somewhere on this list. I'd say either web dev, software dev, DevOps eng, maybe net eng, maybe AI eng. My point being, there's some things on this list I think you have to be a little more senior just to, rephrase, a little more experienced just to get into them, right? Can you, I guess you could be a project manager, solution architect. You're not going to start as a solution architect. If you are, you're going to fail. You have to have experience in one of those other areas to know how to architect and design that thing, right? Cybersecurity ops is interesting. I've mentored folks and try to help them get gigs in the industry, and a lot of companies out there don't want to hire fresh green people to go into ops. They want them to go into some other area first and then go into ops. So that's sort of interesting. GRC manager, I mean, managers in the title, so you're not going to be intro or not going to be entry. So from that point of view, it's interesting to select the job families and think about what do you need for them. I just clicked on IT services manager. The basic skill required sure looks a lot like what we had for web dev. Maybe not completely, but at least some of them. So I guess the point there is that group of B skills or B numbered skills are sort of what you need for most of these things, maybe?
Yeah, and I like how you separated the families themselves into a bit of a hierarchy, and hierarchy based on just experience. Because especially if I'm starting out as one of the developers, web, software, maybe even platform engineer, my mind might be, here is 1,000 lines, maybe 10,000 lines of code is one of the biggest, bigger code bases, or my thought is encompassing that size. But I'm going to guess when you start to get into that architecture angle, I'm going to set you up for this one, I think correctly. You're going to ask me, well, how does it scale? And that sounds like a little bit dismissive, but those are different considerations. And I'll pull in the security aspect here in the sense of how does it scale, for authentication, or what is the failure mode here? Do we fail secure? Do we fail open? And those, I think, do come from experience, and there's not great book learning out here because, honestly, I was struggling to find some good references for such of those architecture areas.
I think the first question there is, do you need it to scale? Those next questions you're asking are, they're really good, but that's, and also as we're looking through this list, I realized I was just looking at the basic skill requires. There's all basic skills required. There's also intermediate and advanced. So they are doing some leveling within these, which is cool. But yeah, do you need to think about, are you running in an environment where you need to think about those more, I'll say, interesting things beyond, now you've figured out the basic AppSec things we're referring to in basic, but how do you deal with, do you need to do retries or backoffs, or how do you handle scale or things like that? That's the fact that you have to think about that question is, it starts giving you a sense. I'll tell a story. Go see if I can anonymize it out. It's a new developer. It's an intern, and they were working on their summer project was. It doesn't matter what it was, but it was some sort of basic where you're going to scan something, and then you want to scan it. You want to scan something, figure out that data, put it into a database, and then go back and display it on a web page. So pretty standard sort of common project you'd have in college, right? Like are actually most companies out there. Okay, so you need a database, MySQL, PostgreSQL, DynamoDB. Any of these type of things are great databases, reliable. They can run them at scale. It can do those type of things. But for where I am right now, we're at the scale of like, if that database fails, it might be 3 nines reliability. That's still a problem. Versus we've got this object store out there, which I'm not going to mention its name because I'm trying to be not selling my company. That object store has 5, 6, 7 nines reliability behind it. So maybe I want to put the data over there so that if I have something that's a critical service, it's going to be up longer. But how many people in the world actually care about that type of thing at that level? So yeah, different scalability is, or do you need to scale? Is Lemonade stands just fine running on a, Raspberry Pi?
Yeah, and I think I make this comment far too infrequently, if that phrase could be logically make sense, is that when we cover some articles from, this is the Google Project Zero, or Google's talking about something, or one of those other big companies, that's not me. Not everybody has those same problems, and not everybody has the many hundred or size staff of a security team either. So try to put these into, let's not jump into over engineering. And that makes me think too, let's touch on that AI engineer role family just a bit, because one of our other fun jokes is let's prompt the AI to say, blah, 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 write some code, but make it secure, which if only, prompting was so easy, I guess we can't also say, but make it scale. So what does this AI engineer job family look like to you? It's definitely topical, but how important is it? And yeah, or maybe a better question is, are the basics for AI and prompt engineering transferable to others? Because I think you made a point earlier that a lot of these basic skills cross many of the families. Which is
I'm scanning as we talk. I looked at it before, but I'm just trying to refresh the brain. I had another thought there, but it's gone. I think so I think my takeaway from this, as we talk more through it, is the basic skills required seem to be fairly similar for most of these roles, and that makes sense, right? Almost all of them, I think, start off with B1. Understand the basics of security requirements. Okay, cool. Yeah. Handle sensitive data. Implement basic security measures. Okay, cool. If we go down to intermediate, they start looking a little more interesting. Protect AI ML models from adversarial attacks. Well, that sure sounds simple. Actively participate in incident response. Interesting that called it out like that. These are pretty high-level concepts. So I think getting back to your thing, I think, and I'm sure this is like, talking about interviewing, a lot of the resumes I'm seeing coming in nowadays are, the kids in college are like, obviously they're interested in AI and they're taking the AI classes.
Of course.
Or projects or like that type of thing. You can definitely see like a lot of that. Are they thinking about securing it? Can they think about secure it? Let's put it that way, from the point of view of, is there enough material out there around how to secure these things that it has bubbled up into either a class or a course or a project that they can work on with someone over a summer or something, or as a class course, class project? I'm not sure we're there yet. I'm not sure the industry is there, to be honest, to be able to say, hey, this is what we need from you, which is sort of scary, but I think that's the truth.
Yeah, and I'd add to that too, that there's an aspect, even just MCP, the protocol itself only has just added a formalization of how OAuth is expected to work with it just within the last 2 months. So that's a way to say, yeah, AI is fun, LLMs are fun, but here is also the security dimension of, well, can it be secured? And you pick that apart in the sense of, can it be secured in terms of authentication and authorization? What about file system access? You could do one of my favorite topics, talk about path traversal, or just talk about data handling or interacting with other agents. How do you have one malicious agent versus a bunch of others that are nominally trusted? And that's where I guess I'm describing this in the sense of an example of how to have fun with new technologies, but still pull in some of that, call it AppSec thinking, or really just basic threat modeling. And you're describing that a lot of these basic skills do seem to be cross-cutting, and I realize that they do need to have them slightly prioritized amongst different families. But I would pick on, it's the cybersecurity operations and your favorite, that GRC manager. Those are the only two that I could tell that actually calls out as a basic skill, written and oral communications. And, they talk about it in the sense of documenting incidents or talking about explaining to stakeholders. But I think those communication skills are essential for any developer, because if we're describing, call it prompt engineering, which I feel dirty just describing, if you're trying to explain to an LLM what you want to be written code-wise, your vibe coding, you're probably explaining in a similar way to another human. Or if you're writing code, you want to explain, well, I wrote this code, I made these decisions for these algorithms, or this is why we don't need to scale. I do just want my lemonade stand, as a callback to what you were describing. So I wonder how much of those do you look for as, call it, whether documenting code or design docs or even just use cases that you see in these written and oral communication skills? Or maybe a second way to ask that too, to give you a chance to think about this, how often do you see those being important as basic skills or for junior and new hires?
I do. I'm just filtering the thought a little. This is a really interesting topic from a few different points of view. I think modern large enterprises, while we care about communication. We want someone to be able to communicate. We don't want to filter somebody out purely on that, right? So I'm going to go from, it's probably going to sound a little woke to some of you, but I'm going to go from there over into detail. From the point of view, we want to give everyone a chance, right? Someone could be on a spectrum and they're not a communicator, or maybe they're not communicating visually. They'd rather sit in the back corner and do something. So we need to create an environment where everyone's able to work together and communicate in whatever that form is. So that's one point. As we bring that back through, the thing with these current systems is you have to learn to communicate with them. I'm talking about Gen AI and LLMs and things where you have to do the talk to. So I think it's been a really interesting experience for me personally of, how I code personally versus how I run a dev team versus how I tell a Gen AI prompt to code are different. I mean, I haven't run I'm running a junior software dev team right now because one of my managers left, but generally I work with more senior people, right? Even in previous lives in startup and stuff, I'm still working with folks who've been around the block a few times. When you're working with a puppy dog like ChatGPT, well, it might have a huge crazy brain behind it, or Claude Code. To get what you want out of it to be successful, we'll go talk about this later in the news probably, you have to be really careful about what you're looking for, very specific about what you're looking for. I want this type of input, this type of output. And probably back to as you were thinking around, I need you to use this version of TLS or set it up this way and make sure it's secure and follow best practices and blah, 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 blah. And follow best practices by going and researching it, not going and actually just coming up with the best practice. So again, I think it comes back to experience, to have the experience to understand what it means to use those tools. And then if I'm looking to talk to you in that interview, or like it could be on the job, or maybe you're switching from another team, whatever, have it. Do you have that understanding of, I need to communicate with this thing in this way? I remember when I was doing CSSP back in the day, first time was 98? One of the things they really stress is the reason we're using this common vocabulary and common sort of skill set is we want you to be able to professionally talk with other people in your industry, or could be above you or below your customers. When we say cross-site scripting, we say something very specific. We're talking about something for a reason, right? And I think now we've gone from, we're still talking and caring about that, but there's so much knowledge out there that you have to have some sense about, that you can't learn all those things and then be able to, so basically pick up a little bit of that. And then how do you apply that to Gen AI?
Yeah, and one of those aspects too is we try to come to the end here too is maybe a little bit of call to action, or how to apply these skills, or how to start to build these skills. And to riff on what you were saying a little bit, you don't have to go down the LLM route about prompting and describing. You could also pick one of the OWASP projects and expand a README for it, or think, oh, this paragraph doesn't feel clear to me. Let me rewrite it and suggest it. And suddenly you can see, how does someone else react to that? And they say, oh, well, you meant all of these things, but you meant them in your brain, and you thought that everybody was going to believe or think the same way you were, and surprise, they don't. And that's always just a great experience in practicing those written skills. That doesn't have to be multiple documents or super long blog posts. But speaking of blog posts, as we always love, we were talking about how much we enjoyed Watchtower, having some personality and a simple walkthrough of, here's what my thought was, here's how I played with a bug bounty, and it either succeeded or it failed. We don't necessarily cover all the times that an attack or an exploit fails, but there's still something useful there. And if you listen back to James Kettle, that was one of the things that he said too, just write up what you did. And the reason I'm harping on that is that sense of it's a good way to practice. It's a good way to organize your thoughts. And it's also very helpful to go back when you say, oh, what was that? There was something I forgot about. I don't know what it was, but if you have it written down, in whatever way you have it, it's a great way to prompt your memory. So my call for basic skills that are cross-country and across all these families would be just practicing that written and oral communication skills, which listeners can still hear me stumbling over as I have an and ah every once in a while, or perhaps more than every once in a while. Go ahead,
It's
John.
really tough, right? I mean, again, and I'm not trying to play the liberal card, but if maybe the person I'm hiring or person I'm bringing in, maybe English isn't their first language. So, okay, it's you have to somehow, I'm not looking for correctness of English, right? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, do you have the ability to get that thought out of your head of like, this thing on screen, go bang, right? It's like, okay, how do we, that went bang that time. If I change this, does it go bang in a different way? But that's sort of, it's not purely about the English, or that's one of the ways I'm pedantic, was the way I'm thinking of it. It's not about your punctuation. It's not about, maybe spelling, but did you had that thought, you had this thing you're interested about. If I'm taking notes, like they're usually bulleted, like I'm just like trying to get down as much as I can while someone's talking without interrupting them. So it might be just a word here or there, and then like I go back later and synthesize. And I think that's actually the interesting part of this, is the synthesis is where we learn and where we sort of find our own gaps. Because I think the interesting thing about doing this, like writing the a draft blog post, maybe a blog post of, hey, I tried this and it didn't work, is as you think about that, the words come out and you write them down, do you go, oh, hey, what if I tried it this way instead? So yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a good way. Just have a good engineering principle, having that feedback loop. I tried this, I'll try something else. And it's a good way to unstick yourself, very formal technical term, whether it's pen testing, because all the good pen testing findings, for at least in my experience, came on a Thursday afternoon before the Friday deadline, but maybe it can be better. But we're as always constrained by 14 cybersecurity families in this list and roughly a 30-minute segment. So you've done a great job that I appreciate, not interrupting me as I speak, as you're having all these bullet points in your head. But John, you want to send us out and all of our listeners and wrap up this segment with a final thought from you.
I can see you're also working with the LLMs. I appreciate those great prompts you were giving me. But yeah, that's the best I got.
Thank you for that. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We are going to take a quick break, but fear not, we'll return with the news just a minute. Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked about basic AppSec skills and entry points into different areas of engineering that build experience for thinking about security. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella, who always thinks about security and fortunately also talks about the news, which is very helpful for me this week. John, one of the things one of the blogs that I've been reading well before even Application Security Weekly is the curl blog, because I've always been just a fanboy of the curl project. And for me, it stands out as a great example of an engineering project, a great example of the curation and culturing of, as we were talking about the importance of good communication skills, as I make up words, of an open source project. But of course, we've had Daniel Stenberg on the show previously talk about the AppSec overview in relation to it. And here he's got another post just from July 10th about more views on curl vulns. And what stood out to me is not just raw numbers, but they have a log of data. So there's not that many open source projects that are so continuously curated over 20 years and have such rich data that they can do these nice, here comes a fun word, longitudinal studies, basically long-term studies over decades about what do the vulns look like. And what's interesting is that the vuln age tends to be 6 to 8 years. And so one of the points he was making that, sure, they're writing code today, it may not be, that code may have some vulns that they won't even know about until 2030, 2031, 2032, when we have the 32-bit apocalypse, or was it 2037? I got my math off. I'm sure listeners will enjoy to correct me. But in any case, talking about, there's going to be some, code we're writing today will have vulns in the future. But another thing that he shows in the charts is that not everything is just C and memory safety. There are some cliffs that they encounter where they got rid of a lot of just memory safety issue by being stricter about how they use C, about their style of writing C, which I greatly appreciate. And also just the sense of a lot of the critical vulns are disappearing and they're becoming more of the low to medium types of vulns. And I'm highlighting, obviously, as I opened this up, I was enjoying, curl, but as always, this isn't just about curl, I think there are lessons here that, dear listeners, do you have projects internally like this where you can go and look at what are the types of vulns over time for your projects? Are they diminishing in terms of severity? Do you have something like C that you're getting rid of classes of vulns, or your style, your coding style is making it such that it's harder to introduce vulns? These are the types of thinking that I'm hoping to engender in our listeners. But as always with my test case, my sample N equals 1 is John Kinsella. So John, have I knock on the microphone here? I can't tell if I put him to sleep or not. How am I doing?
Still here. I'll have to give a quick aside to our listeners. Speaking of, and you mentioned CVEs over time. So for folks out there, I'm not going to put in show notes. You can go Google it if you want. Someone's done a chart of the number of CVEs per pope. So I'll leave that as your little funny ha-ha as an aside. Yeah, no, these guys always write fun stuff. And the one quick note for people, because it might confuse some folks, they've watermarked the images. So if you see the : / on the images, that's not like, because on one or two of the bar graphs, I'm like, wait, what is that? No, that's just a watermark. I thought the vulnerability age one was really interesting. From the point of view that they're supporting those. I mean, just the fact that there's a dot there that they're fixing at 23 years means they're supporting it, right? So interesting. As you run a software product and it becomes a little more mature, one of the questions you start thinking about is which one of these versions, how many do we go back and support if there's a bug fix? Because that becomes pretty expensive. And then the other one I really liked is the vulnerabilities present in curl code. So you can see where they went to sort of gangbusters in both 2017 and then in 2019 to sort of knock those high criticalities down to almost nothing. And it barely jumped back up since. So like once they've done some of these things you've talked about, and it's sort of the on the extremely advanced version of that last half conversation we're having, it's like, at what point do you become, I'll say, specialized and mature enough that you start thinking about how you use the software language which you're using. So that's really interesting. Like one of the analogies to me nowadays is, when you're creating like a prompt for your Claude code or something, not just saying, hey, I want this function, but hey, I want you to write this function. I want it to be written in this language with this type of specific, I don't want you to use this or this, even though it's in the language. And it's sort of the equivalent of that, right? Of like, as you become pretty sophisticated to be able to say, hey, we're going to write in such a way with C that we're going to minimize vulnerabilities. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think one of the other things too is that I don't care about the count of CVEs and nor chasing them. And I know that you brought up the very fun way to say, here, let's compare two lines and see what happens. The other part of why I like to highlight this is, as I said, curl is a very mature project, has very experienced developers working on it, as well as welcoming junior developers or less experienced developers, but it still is running into bugs. So this is not like a try to be cynical. It's just pointing out that we as humans are going to make mistaken code, but over time, those mistakes appear to be less impactful, at least within the curl project that they're showing. And so that's what's great. And I think you can, the other lessons here are the sense of pick your programming language, but understand, have some data, have some metrics about your project, about your code to see what's our test coverage look like? What is our lintering look like? Is it helping us avoid mistakes? And I think that generalizes to whatever language you're writing in. It doesn't have to be CISA come knocking at your door pleading with you to not use C or C++ anymore. And
I have to correct myself for those who are playing along from home on the Googles. If you search for CVE per pope, you quickly find out that $pope and $CVE are both different crypto types, and you're able to convert between the two. That's not what I'm talking about. What is this crypto space? They turns anything into a value. Yeah, CVE S plural per pope, and then you'll find the right graph. That's all.
That's all. Yeah, we're going to have to keep that as an Easter egg, so not going into the show notes. But that's how we know where our fun listeners are. John, last week we talked about a blog post from Watchtower, and again, I mentioned even in the last segment about in the sense of written communication skills, write up a vulnerability, because it will obviously grab our attention. And hey, Watchtower, you're getting free free marketing from us because we enjoy it. So congratulations, Watchtower. And we're also going to have to get some of their researchers on here to talk about some of what they're looking at and how they go through these. I did grab another one. This was a pre-auth SQL injection to RCE. And that's always a fun phrase to write up if you're the researcher. Never a fun phrase to be on the receiving end of. But this one points to me of just, it's a basic SQL command injection. And when I see these types of vulns, one of the questions that comes to me that I'm always curious about is, how old was this code? Is this code that just hasn't been touched in ages, and now someone, a researcher, is looking at it, poking at it, or is this new code that's being written? And the answer to that changes my level of scorn, I will say, about the code base, as well as the level of, conveyed maturity about the SDLC within this, within any organization. So if I see, for example, to go back to curl, if there's a critical vuln in curl that comes out this month, next month, I'll be very surprised. But I'll also be impressed about how it was found and be very curious to see what the review of it looks like that Daniel and folks will go in to see how that happened, because they give so much scrutiny. Whereas Fortinet here getting beat up by Watchtower, I'd be very curious to see, are they even, what's their curation look like for this code base, especially to have what seems like, to use one of my favorite phrases I haven't used in a while, a dead simple type of vulnerability and a critical one.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting sucked into the blog post because these are really well written.
See, they're fun.
Yeah, they really are. And try to come back to my thought. Yeah, there's something here I saw that I want to dig into, but yeah, I'm just going to dig into it. This vendor, I stopped putting their issues in because there's a lot of them. And who wrote this? It's just Labs. But the guys over there, they have a paragraph in here talking about vendors that are purposely sitting on vulnerabilities and then making a bit of noise to try and make it look like they were fixed, but just sort of, wave the hand, look over here, which is unfortunate. You talked about the age of the code. I'm guessing not a new code base. Once it's written, from a business point of view, once it's written, if you can put that thing on maintenance, just coast on it, increase your margins, right? Obviously, they're not doing that. I'm sure they care about security. But yeah, I don't think I have too much more to say. I'm going to just,
we broke John with this one, but there's byline. Sina Kirka wrote this one up. And the one thing, additional thing I was going to note about this, it was also running MySQL as root rather than a lower privilege. And that just also is like, where are the security defaults, or where was, why is it running as root I'll just say is a very basic question I'll come out with. And maybe there are legitimate answers or interesting answers, but that's always going to be something that I'm going to poke at and just saying, the answers can be interesting, but I don't think they'll be justifiable, is how I'll come out of that.
I'd love to hear from our feedback from our listeners. For those who are beginning and found the last half really interesting and instructive, that you're trying to get into this field and you're trying to learn how to, what is it, where do I want to specialize, what do I want to do, how, would you rather an entertaining blog post like this, or do you want something more dry that just gives you the facts and get out of the way? So that I'd be really curious to hear from the folks who are learning today.
Do you want to listen to me or do you want to listen to John? I'm the dry one, by the way, just so you know. No. But speaking of age, I do try to have my segues, even though I come up with them on the spot. Here is Risky Business. I always read this. It's in Catalin Campanu. Just wonderful writing. Speaking of more than basic skills, this is someone who's clearly experienced in both knowledge and in getting thoughts across very well. So this is just from this morning, July 14th, about some new OTs that I wasn't familiar with. This is John, major EOT and HOT vulnerability that can bring trains to sudden stops. And that trains is the giveaway for what that T stands for. This is end of train, head of train. But what this points out to is that more than 12 years ago, a researcher found a vuln in a protocol. So they did some really fun play with some radio and some software-defined radios. That's another place where you can have go hang out in that. There's always going to be a DEF CON village for these things. So go hang out with the radio, play with some protocols, and figure out how to suddenly stop a train, which can be dangerous, which can be impactful, which can be very costly. And long story short, but do read the article, the train people, the American Association of Railways, to name them properly, said, not a vuln, or sort of a bit more head in the sand, if you will, about it, because it was not demonstrated, even though the researcher said, let me demonstrate it at your test track. And they said, nah, we're fine. A couple of years later, another researcher finds the same thing, actually gives a presentation on it at DEF CON 26. And again, nothing moved. So now, it's finally this year has a CVE 2025 1727. For those of you who love CVE numbers, this vulnerability has been acknowledged and maybe is going to be dealt with. But here's a key part that I thought might be interesting to talk about. Fixing this might be 5 to 7 years to fully mitigate, and maybe $7 to $10 billion to remediate. Yeah. Now, this is the researcher who is an informed researcher, so I'm not being dismissive. But I'm curious that that's got to be, even if it's within the ballpark or even a 50% margin of error, that's still a long time and a lot of money to fix. So I guess when your IoT devices are moving and they weigh in the order of tons, not so easy as just a firmware update, is it?
Yeah, so I've read one or two things over the year on train technology from the point of view of, massively out of date, and that railway organization, won't call them a union, I can't remember if they're a union or not, so I'll call them an org. They tend to frequently have this sort of dragging their feet to update tech. And also part of it is they haven't been getting a lot of funding from the U.S. government. This is a U.S. thing, I'm sure. Well, at least from my knowledge, train system in Europe is a lot better. Asia too. But would it really cost $7 billion to replace, I think it's 75,000 devices, right?
Yeah.
Okay, $100, $1,000 each, $10,000 each. It's a hard time to get a hard amount of money to get up to the billions, right? They were trying to update these, and probably not the same system. They've been trying to update the train control system, and they've done it in certain parts of the U.S., don't think everywhere, to do automatic speed control. So if the guy at the wheel falls asleep and there's a turn coming, it still knows to slow down for the turn. Pretty decent thing. But yeah, this is by itself is scary, but not surprising from what we've seen from IoT space, right? Of just people, I would expect more on a train, right? And you've got like this thing of thousands of tons, I don't know, maybe millions. I don't know how heavy those things are, the long ones. You'd think you'd want to put a little more thought into security of the system. But there you go. Mike, back to your threat design and sort of walking through that initially. Maybe that's what's being missed here.
Yeah, and for those of you out there, if you have $120 or so to spend, you could download the IEEE standard, the 802.16t, which is the proposed replacement protocol that does have, to quote, it supports both security and lower latency. But I'll always be, maybe not to be over pedantic, maybe I'll probably be cynical on this point. There's a difference between supports and does it well. So, hey, that could be an area of research for the next DEF CON if you want to download that protocol, play with it, and get your local SDR. It's not something I would say necessarily is a basic skill that's required, but it's one of those things that can be really fun. And maybe there's a bug bounty in it for you that won't take 12 years to be acknowledged as legit. Speaking of the last segment, John, I did pull in an article that's not really appsec-y so much. It falls more on what I just call DevOps or just software development. This is writing a basic Linux device driver when you know nothing about Linux drivers or USB, which, hey, that sounds pretty appealing and pretty general, but it's a type of blog post that is, I think, fits into that sense of what are you interested? What do you want to secure? And do you want to secure the Linux kernel? Do you want to secure USB? Or do you want to hack either of those things, of course? A great way to learn is by doing. And this is a great example of starting from scratch and turning on some LEDs, which is always a fun thing to do. And you could learn a little bit about kernel device drivers or user space device drivers, a little bit about Rust. So there's a couple different things that are ways of just learning by doing. So wanted to highlight this article because, I thought it was well written and accessible and does a pretty good job of walking through what the author is trying to do and trying to convey, and of course, whether or not they're successful. But a little bit of a caveat, don't mess up your stuff. So you also maybe, if you're experimenting, whether it's on your own train in the backyard or just your USB keyboard with lights on it, be careful about releasing the magic smoke that makes it not work anymore.
And they're writing in Rust, so hey, cool. It's a neat, and it's like for those of you who haven't done like you hear us talk about IoT and stuff like that. The reason, at least I like doing it, is like it's cool actually seeing this physical thing. Like when Mike was talking about turning on an LED, what popped into my head was, I can't remember, it was my VIC-20 or my Commodore 64 back in the day. I had like a little board that like with like 8 LEDs, and I had written code to turn them on. Like, however many years later, it's still in my mind. So it definitely sort of is a neat way to learn new things.
Oh, and good callback, because that VIC-20, the Commodore 64, that demo scene is where Daniel Stenberg of curl got his start in programming. And he talks a little bit about where his nickname Badger, or misspelled Bagder, comes from. So go check out his blog, and you can read about the C64 demo scene there and make all kinds of things go. I'm going to attempt to quote John, go blinky blinky. I think that's how you would phrase that.
Yes.
But since I do still have you here as a human, John, we haven't replaced you yet, and we haven't actually mentioned LLMs in the news segment, I begrudgingly pulled in an article about LLMs. This is from Meter, M-E-T-R, measuring the impact of early 2025 AI on experienced open source developer productivity. And this is a fun article that, as many of these articles are going to be throughout the summer, I will say this, the summer and winter and fall and spring and so on, blah, 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 as I bore everyone, of AI hype. This is a bit of a Rorschach test for how you want to interpret it, I will say. So I'll set that up briefly. But what it's saying is that developers on some open source projects, so were given some AI tools to go and do some of the work you do. So one of the things I like about this, it's not synthetic, it's not made up. Go reverse a red-black tree or do a linked list or something like that are, trivia types of code or code golf types of interview questions. It's like, go do your work. Here's an AI. Tell us how more quickly, how more efficient you were. And long story short, it points out a psychological behavior where people can often be misreporting or self-report, misidentify their own self-reported increase in efficiency. And I will say, up front, this is probably not restricted to developers or open source developers. It's probably a pretty general aspect as well. So it's very interesting to see how do we measure what we're talking about and how we think we're improving or not. And I can tell John is definitely chomping at the bit to talk here. So I'm going to stop filibustering and let him go.
Wind up the toy. Your point there at the end sort of got me thinking from the point of view, well, we'll talk through this. I have thoughts. But yeah, software developers suck at estimation. Myself
What's your
included.
T-shirt size? Yeah,
myself
exactly.
included. So I guess from that point of view, I should not be surprised that group of individuals thought they'd be quicker than they are. The interesting part, I missed if you might have said it, but one of the stats they had in there was even at the end, after they made the changes with the tools, their impression still was that they thought they had been faster than what the wall clock said. The economists thought they'd be more effective, which to me means that the hype of AI is spreading outside of the smaller field of San Francisco. So that's the high level, but let's go back for sort of with, obviously I've been playing in this world now for a little bit. the thought that came to me, and I looked it up before we hopped on air, is did the devs have experience with the tools? Or not so much the tools, did the devs have experience with how do you work with, I'm going to say, agentic software development? And the answer, so in the white paper with this, or research paper, they say they were using Cursor, which is one of the IDEs that has some of this stuff built into it. It's a fork of VS Code, and then they've added in their own LLM Gen AI stuff. 44% of the devs had previous experience with it. So you're giving them a research project where they're both having learned a tool, and for those of you who know VS Code, Cursor looks significantly different. So there's a bit of, even that took me a few days to get used to. Don't like it. That's my own thing. But then once you have that, how do you use a modern, again, I'll say agentic, and I'm using that phrase for a purpose, coding buddy, use that phrase. And the thing is, it's not like a few years ago. So remember when GitHub, what did they originally call it? They now call it Copilot. Their version of LM coding, Gen AI coding. You would type into, you'd make a comment in VS Code or whatever you're using and say, hey, I want to write a function that does this. And then it would go and it would do something. The modern way you use these tools is not like that. So state of the art is, and this is talked about off air, is you have a conversation with this thing and you say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Let's come up with a plan how we're going to create this thing or fix this thing and put that into a doc. And then you're going to go through that doc, refine it with your coding buddy, and then go through and say, now you got to a place you want it, go implement that. So Cursor is going between these two. It's got a chat window, which is sort of weird to me to have a chat window in your IDE. I think my personal preference is to have like a terminal. But so you got a chat window that you're trying to have a conversation with, but you also have the ability to go and pointy-clicky in the code and have changes come from in there. You don't just learn this like it's an experience that takes, I'd say, at least a week or two to sort of understand how to use this tool. I think that had a significant effect on both, we have the size of this just being 16 people, but also how they use these tools. So I think that plays this to a degree.
Yeah.
The one thing I don't like about this article, I'd love to see it at a larger scale. I'd love to see a little more depth behind it. But the problem is so many people are going to be quoting this and going like, oh, this is why you shouldn't be using Cursor at work. Okay, cool. I'm nowadays in the camp. I don't know what this thing's going to be great for. I don't know where I can use it, where I can't use it. I got some ideas. I'm not going to put it on a high performance data plane. But at the same time, do I think it can? Maybe it's my developer head. I've got a pretty good sense that these things can help improve performance. I think what we're trying to performance of software development. I think where we're trying to figure out now is where in there. Is it great for docs? Yes. Is it good for writing test cases? I think so. My personal theory, to bring it back to the show, I don't know if we're going to have fuzz editors in 2 or 3 years. I think this thing is good enough to replace fuzzers. But that's the question, is where does this thing be used? So I sincerely think everyone should be playing with them just from the point of view of like, what is it? What's going on? This new technology. Where's it usable? And what can you do with it? And are the numbers in this article accurate? Maybe.
Yeah. As you said, that n equals 16. So it's a small sample size. And they also, are, I think they rightly say, try not, this is why I described this as a Rorschach test. Mm-hmm. Don't, over extrapolate on what this means. They do have a graph, to your point about, prior experience, not experience. They do see, again, with caveats, that around 50 hours was the turning point where they started to see some efficiency. So using Cursor for about 50 hours, not very efficient, even slower. After 50 hours, maybe there's something there. So it is interesting. It's one of those things that we're going to throw this into our classic, the John Kinsella 6 months later look back for. But I think, too, I agree with what you're saying about where are we going to be finding this as a developer assistant. I'm still not seeing the AppSec assistant, but you did, John, there at the end, call out fuzzing. And I guess since we are in summer, we're getting close to the AI Cyber Challenge, and we're going to see Trail of Bits and others see how they throw an LLM plus a fuzzer against applications for, importantly, both the finding and the fixing of vulnerabilities. So that's something that we're definitely going to be covering once that rolls around at the end of this summer.
Yeah, I mean, if they're good enough that I can point them at the code base and say, hey, can you tell me what this thing's doing, or what this function does, or what type of inputs it takes? It's not a big jump in my mind to say, why don't you try seeing what other type of inputs you can put into this thing now that you know it, and go and run it. I suspect it can do that a whole lot faster than setting up a fuzzer. So, yeah, I don't know. I need to go and experiment with that maybe, and not just have it as a thought. But yeah, we'll see.
There's a couple $1 million on the line if you want to figure out how to get into AIXCC. But since you did, sorry, John, since you did miss the pre-qualifiers for the Cyber Challenge, you still can, however, get into the Ultimate Cloud Security Championship from Wiz. This is a CTF that they set up, and they just had in June their first challenge, and they've got a bunch of challenges up through May 2026. So every month you could jump into a new type of, obviously cloud-oriented, this is from Wiz, type of CTF. And the reason I highlighted this is that we talked about bug bounties in the last segment. Bug bounties and CTFs can be fun areas to learn about technical topics. I will say with a major caveat, some of them can be very specific and not necessarily generalized AppSec skills. They can be very narrow into, this is a very specific Kubernetes breakout, or here is a very obscure way of a Linux kernel driver heap overflow. They could be fun to learn, but in this case, Wiz has had some great ones with prompt injection as well, and now they've got the cloud one. We've covered Wiz a lot, and once again, free marketing. So hey, Wiz, if you have a couple extra $1 billion, send some of that marketing our way. That's my plea. This is my vendor prompt injection to get more sponsors. We'll see if that works.
Remember now, this is Google money, so that $1 billion over to us is that shouldn't be that big a problem.
It shouldn't be a problem.
I'm still a little wound up on the previous topic. So CTFs I think are a great way to learn. I'd love to have time to do it myself, but I know I won't. But where I wanted to go is think about how could one of those bots, whatever you want to call them, either could be in a browser with Claude or something like that, OpenAI, or a coding buddy or something. Could they, or how could they help you with a challenge like this? That could be interesting to play with. There's no other thought in there, but I'm still thinking about Google dollars. So, yeah.
All right, well, that's it. While Google thinks about, while John thinks about his Google dollars, there's some bug bounties out there to go find. We'll see. But I will say thank you, John. Give him some time to go do some of that CTF challenge if he's got it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Please do remember to subscribe, check out the show notes, share us on the socials. And speaking of just the two of us, check out Duality by Neon Knox and Power Nerd. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.